Hey everybody, this is Jimmy Beach with Exposure Software. Just want to make sure that everybody has made it here today before we get started with our demonstration. This is an Exposure Foundations demonstration. What that means is we're going to go through the entire process of editing with Exposure. We're going to go from copying images from the camera card, which would be the first step, and all the way through to exporting our finished files. So let me give you a little bit of a backup or a little bit of background about Exposure, and then we'll begin with the lesson. So Exposure is our advanced non-destructive raw photo organizer and editor. It handles a full post-processing workflow, which we'll see today. You can use it from the beginning, where you copy images from your camera cards, then you apply editing adjustments, then creative effects, then export finished photos, and then you can even print from right in Exposure. Now, a quick history lesson about Exposure is that about 15 years ago, Exposure was created for film photographers. Most of them struggled with shooting with film and then editing in the darkroom with chemistry, and then they struggle with the transition to shooting with a digital camera and editing in the computer. So, Exposure gave them Exposure's accurate film emulation presets were really what helped them to make the transition over to using a digital processing workflow. So anyway, let's get started today. And we will see how cool Exposure is. So, all right, so ingesting images from cards is usually the first step in the process. So that is when we're copying images or ingesting them. So let me open up the copy photos from card dialog. We'll say that twice. All right. So here's the copy images from card dialog. Inside of this dialog, it's very simple. There are 3 different steps to go through here, and they're labeled across the top. Step 1 is on the left. This is where we select the source where our images are saved. We can go from several different camera cards at the same time if we want to copy them all at once, or we can grab images from another hard drive or something that's attached that way, or Dropbox. Step 2 is where we review them and select which ones to copy, and then over here on step 3 is where we tell it where we want the images to be copied. So I'll select the camera card right here. And inside the camera card, I have a bunch of images right here. They're all raw images. Exposure handles a lot of different raw image files. In addition to TIFF, JPEG, DNG files, and even PSD, Photoshop PSD files. Excuse me. So we've reviewed these images. We have them selected here. And then we're going to copy them over here. Now, we can select which destination folder we want to. I have the desktop saved. Usually I save things to the desktop, and then after I edit them there, then I move them into an external drive or something that's much larger than my main hard drive. So we also have here, it says generate subfolders, and I'm going to be creating a subfolder that is Jean-Francois, and that's who is responsible for these lovely photos. So on the desktop here in this folder, we are going to have a subfolder with Jean-Francois' initials. Okay, so down here we can also point out that we can convert raw files to DNG files if we want that format. We can rename our images as they're being copied here to any naming convention we always use. You know, if you put your studio name in there, or if you always have your own name or client name or however. And you can apply metadata for copyright and for information about you, as well as information to organize these images as they're being copied. You can put them in collections here. You can assign keywords to them so that help you organize them in your computer or elsewhere. And you can even apply Exposure's creative presets directly to your images as they're being copied from the cards. So after that, I'm going to say OK to start the process. It says there's about 17 of these raw files to copy, so it's going to go really quick. Okay, so as I do that, I'm going to go over to that folder on my desktop. There we go. Oh, it's done. Okay, so when the computer's so fast that you can't see it, what I wanted to do was point out that Exposure doesn't use a catalog. And so you can immediately begin working on the images even while they're being copied to your computer. So imagine we had thousands of images and it actually took a few seconds. Then we can go in here and you can see my cursor move around. You can see I can go in here and make some different selections or edits or organize these photos even while that's still going on. So you're just going to have to take my word for it. But trust me, that's how it is. So there are no modules either in Exposure. So all the commands are available all the time. So you can always access and edit files. It doesn't matter what view you're in. You can switch back and forth between images just like so. You can apply any kind of edits you want at any time. Also, Exposure uses a catalog-free workflow. So let me show you what that means. I'm going to pull up a Finder window. Here we go. So it uses a catalog-free workflow. So on my desktop, I have these folders you can see right here, and I'm selected the same one we can see in the folders panel on the left. Then I'm selected it here, and you can see all the images inside that folder, just like on my desktop. And these are where the sidecar files live for Exposure. So because Exposure, all the edits are stored here in the sidecar file, we can easily back this folder up, just copy it. I can just drag this folder right over and save it to another drive. See, I can save it to iCloud if I wanted to. I can drag it onto an attached drive that I have here. I have a backup hard drive. So I can drag it over there and make a copy, and it copies all of my images, and it copies all the edits, and it copies all of the organizing information. So that's really quick and easy to do. And so this also, there's no single point of failure with this system, so it's a little bit quicker. Okay. Every once in a while I take a drink of water, so if it gets quiet, that's just me, hydrating. It's important. All right, so let's, now we have our images copied, so let's take a look at how we can organize these images. Okay, so the folder structure, as I pointed out inside of Exposure, is this exact same as it is in your computer hard drive. You can see down here, I have my attached storage device, like I said, and up here we have the desktop folder, and inside of there we have our folder from Jean-Francois. So that makes it really easy, so we don't have to relearn where we have everything stored and organized, which I kind of like. So also we have collections right here inside of the folder panel in Exposure. And collections are a good way to group together images that live in different places on your computer. So I can have landscape images here that are on a hard drive that is attached and on the main hard drive, et cetera, and then we can group them there. And so we can find those collections really, really quick and easy. You should definitely check out the collections video on our website for more about that. Okay, so let's get to calling these images. In Exposure, we can do a couple of things to call images down or to edit our shoot down to the top selects. Editing a shoot's a great way to not have to process every single image that you took. As you can see in this set, which I think is a really good representation of, editorial or whatever. These images there's a lot of very similar facial features or facial expressions, and the light's very subtle changes and things like that. So typically, this is what you see when you actually copy images from your card. So let's get to organizing them. Keyboard shortcuts are going to help you out a whole lot when you're doing organizing things inside of Exposure, and so I will use those now as I'm demonstrating. If you hover your cursor over an image, you can see at the bottom there are star ratings. So I gave that one a 5. There are color labels over on the right side. If you left click, that cycles through the color labels. right click and you can see the different color label options. And on the left side is the pick flag or reject flag. I just right click there so you can see the menu. You can have no flag or a pick flag or a reject flag. Now, all of these things that I just pointed out correlate with keyboard commands so that you can easily make these, apply these organizing tools. So what I'll do is we can go overall really quickly through this shoot, but we want to apply some rating criteria to these images. So what I can do is use my keyboard, and I'll go through here and say, and I'll push 3 to set that to 3, and I'll just go to the next one with the right click on my keyboard, and we'll say 4 for that one. And this one's a little closer, and I like it, so let's say that one's a 5. Okay. So if we use the modifier keys, which would be Shift in this case, and then apply our star ratings, it will automatically go to the next image in the batch. So I'm going to give this one a 5. This one I can see that her visor crosses right over the eye, so I'm going to give that one a 4, even though I think it's cool. And the next one has the visor right over her nose, so I'm going to give that one a 3. See, and then we can go through quickly, and you can see it automatically advances to the next in the set. So if I want to be really picky, I can go in there and assign everything at a tighter view, which let's do that now. So we've already assigned star ratings to all these images. Now let's apply color labels to them. So that's the numbers 6, 7, 8, and 9. And really all this is doing is just signifying that we either really like that image or we're so-so about it, or we can say that we want to print it or something like that, depending on what it is. So I'm going to say red. I'm going to hold down Shift and hit red for a keeper and yellow for a not keeper. That one's good. No, no. That's good. No. Yeah, no. Okay, you can see how quick it goes through when you do it this way. So now I hit escape. I'll go back to the grid view. We can see that we have all of these rated and organized already for us. So that was pretty fast. And that's what exposure is all about. It gets you quickly through the organizing stuff so you can get on to your creative editing, which is the fun part anyway. So let's use the filters at the bottom because this is what you do when we're imagining that we're going through 1,000 or 2,000 images here. So we've been doing our ratings for the last 20 minutes, let's say 30 minutes. Now we can apply a filter. For instance, everything that's 4 stars and above I want to see. And now I want to see everything that's 4 stars and above with our green. We're going to keep it, designation. So there we go. So these are our top shots, right? So we've processed these images now, or we have organized these images now. We have labels on them and we know which ones we're going to edit. So now is when we would turn the tides over and we would go into raw processing, and that's what we're going to do next. So now I did mention a bunch of shortcut keys, and I do want to call out that you can always find the shortcut keys in exposure right from the help menu. They're listed right there at the top. And also while I'm here, since the manual is right above it, you can select the manual and that'll take you to the website and you can check through the owner's manual online, and everything's written there as well. Okay, so now let's go. Remember again, we're looking at our folders the folders on our hard drive here. I'm going to go to a folder that is not on my computer, but is on my attached storage here while I take a drink of water. Okay. So let's take a look at some of my favorite shots. Oh, look, I left my filter on. That's a good thing. I'll point that out. So, hey, if you ever get this message right here that says no images matching filter, that means that you left the filter on from something you did previously. So you can just reset it with Command 0 or click right there. There we go. We have images from Paola Paz. These are super cute. I love them. Okay, so let's take a look at this. We have images that are JPEG in this folder. We have images that are NEF in this folder. And I think there's a PNG in this folder too. So we're going to use our filters at the bottom one more time. And here, by filter by metadata, I'm just going to type in NEF because that's the file type, the raw file type for Nikon. That's what Paola shoots. So Shazam. Now we have a filter applied, and we're just seeing the images that we actually want to edit in this folder. Pretty easy. So as we go to process these images, let's talk about how we apply editing adjustments. Now, we can apply editing adjustments kind of in two different ways. We can apply adjustments to correct any issues inside of the photo, or we can apply adjustments to add like a creative effect or to use creatively. So correcting issues in photos is really where you typically start. So then we're going to do that here. Let's talk about those real quick. Okay, so inside of exposure, let's talk about correcting issues. So really the first place that you just think about correcting issues is something that has the word correction in it. That was a really dry and dumb joke. Lens correction. So inside of exposure, you have manual and automatic lens corrections, and this is a good example. This image right here was shot with a lens that's not supported by exposure, so it doesn't have a lens profile made up. But if I hit the right arrow key, it goes to the next image in the folder, and we can see here this one is supported. Now, we don't have to use the profile. We can always set it to manual if we want to, so that if you wanted to dial it in, you can. But, lens correction's a really good place to start. Another thing is sharpening and noise reduction. Typically, those things happen at the beginning of the workflow. So I'll double click so that we can zoom in at full screen on this little girl. Okay, so typically when I'm doing things with detail like this, sharpening, noise reduction, I always try to view the image as large as I can. So there are a bunch of different ways that you can apply sharpening, and they're really strong, and they do a really good job here inside of exposure. So I can just apply some sharpening, just like this, and then I can, on the sharpening panel, if I hold the Alt key and I set these sliders, then it gives me a little bit of help, and you can see how the preview changes. So this is telling me which of the edits or edges I'm picking up with the radius. So I'm going to keep it subtle so I barely see anything in there. And then I'll set the detail and then hold down the Alt key for the masking. And this tells us which edges we want to use our sharpening on. There we go. I want those eyelashes and those teeth to look real sharp there. Now I can just turn the amount of this effect down because we don't really need that much. And that's it. Sharpening is applied. Noise reduction is very similar to that. This one has a profile already, so I don't really need to do anything. This image wasn't noisy in the first place, so we don't really need to put any of that on here, but it is an option, and typically this is one of the things that you do when you're correcting issues in an image, so I wanted to bring that up. Also, the transform tools, if you have perspective or skew or anything like that, that is something to take into consideration when you're making any adjustments to your image right from the get-go. So these three things that we mentioned, four things: lens correction, transform, sharpening, and noise reduction. Those are all great things to think about when you first get your images into exposure. And then, probably cropping and editing too. So let's crop that a little bit. I'm going to just get her centered inside of that, just like that. Okay. All right. So now let's talk about more creative editing side. So now that we have our basics out of the way, not quite, we'll get to the creative edits here in a second. So inside of exposure, we have the basic panel. This is where you do a lot of your basic edits, like adjustments to exposure and contrast. And most of the time, if we're going to apply a creative preset to it, starting with an image that has correct exposure and white balance and is sharp and it doesn't have a lot of noise is the best way to start. That gives you the clearest idea as to what those presets are going to do to that image. So inside of exposure, I am just going to select the auto button just like this, and that's going to automatically add a little bit of some processing. So hey, I've been using this for doing some other landscape work just recently, so I have made some adjustments to it. And yeah, it's a little dark. But that's okay. I just wanted to see what it would do. Inside of our auto adjustments, I can reset all of this however I want it to be. And so I'm just going to raise the exposure bias and then do it again. There we go. Okay. So now that we have our basic edits set on this layer, we're going to go over to the left side and we're going to look at the presets. The presets are really where the creative fun begins. So exposure became known for these presets in exposure. So let me take another sip of water here real quick. Okay, so I'm going to move the splitter up so we have more of this panel to show. Okay, and then I'll close the histogram. Okay, so the presets in Exposure. Exposure's rendering engine was built to accurately emulate film, even down to the subtleties of individual film grain clumps. And the presets in Exposure, they simulate a variety of these iconic film looks, even down to that grain structure that I mentioned. So each of them are easy to see, and they're organized by type. So you can go here, I'll go all, and we can see that we can get through them pretty quick. So all of these presets can be used one at a time, or they can be used, you can use several of them. Sorry, I just lost my place. Oh, you can use them unmodified, or you can use them one at a time. And so, but however, I'm going to add a new layer because I made some adjustments here. So I'm going to add a new layer so we don't wipe any of those out. And then if we click, we'll see what this preset looks like on the image, just like that. So now I said that you can add a bunch of different looks on the image if you'd like to, and so let's choose another one. Oops, I'll do another black and white one. This time I'm going to right click, and I'll choose New Layer with Preset. Now you can see that it's an even more dark and intense look. Now I'm doing this on purpose to do the demo. This doesn't look really great to me. But I did want to point out that the Layers panel enables you to blend the different looks together, and that blending is part of customizing your look to whatever image you're using. And that's really, really easy to do in Exposure. Okay, so let's get rid of these. Whoops. Let's get rid of these layers. And we'll come back. We'll come back to that. I want color. And I want Fuji Pro. There we go. So I just want a little light Fuji Pro look to this. It's a very subtle old color film look. Now I'll close that. And then let's talk about how we can make some edits to this look. So inside of our layers panel, we have two different layers here, and the top one, I'm going to close the layers panel and we will come back to it because it's more complicated and we don't need to get into it right now. But I can turn this Fuji Pro preset on and off. And you can see this layer right here has a switch on the left-hand side. If I turn it off, it just looks like the image like it was straight out of the camera, and turn it back on, and now we have that subtle look to it. Okay, now let's talk about our basic, or actually let's talk about spot heal. So it's right here under the spot heal, looks like the Band-Aid icon. All right, so the spot heal allows us to do some retouching work to our images inside of Exposure. For example, I think this is watermelon. There we go. So I wanted to touch up that little bit of watermelon on this little cute angel's face, just like that. So inside of Exposure, this is a very easy to use tool. It has two modes. It has heal mode and it has clone mode. The spot heal tool, once you put the spot down, you can see the marching ants, so those black and white alternating spots that go around it. That is our active spot. So we can still make changes to it with the controls on the top of this panel. I can add a little bit more feathering. I can make it a little bit larger. I can turn the opacity of it down so that I'm not, if it was something that wasn't all that distracting, I could take it, the opacity of it down instead of remove it completely. And I can move the sample point where it's sampling from. Usually it nails it, does a pretty good job. Okay. So there we go. So that's gone. All right, so let's talk about basic color and tone curve panel, or basic color and tone curve. So the basic panel, we made edits to on this bottom layer. I'm going to select that layer again. Okay, this is where our auto adjustments came into play, and you can see that they did our adjustments to exposure highlights, shadows, whites, blacks, dynamic contrast, and haze level sliders. Okay. It also did the temperature intent. It set the white balance for this image as well. So when you're making adjustments inside of exposures panels, start at the top of the panel and then you work your way down through the sliders. Okay. So edits that you make at the top of the panel will actually influence the behavior of these lower sliders. So imagine dialing in a microscope. You use the big dial up here on the top to make things or to bring things into focus, and then you tighten up that focus and make them sharp with the smaller sliders to fine tune that look. So that's kind of how you work through it inside the panel. Okay, let's take a look at the color panel. Color panel has a lot of controls for how you can manipulate the color inside of your images. You can add very simple effects like a simple warm tone or cool it down with a cool tone. I think I like the warm tone a little bit better, so there we go. You can also control colors individually with the hue, saturation, and luminance controls. So these are actually really great at making adjustments to the image. Let's switch to another image so I can show you. Bam. Okay, this one's great. It's one of my favorites. Paola, if you're watching, this one's one of my favorites. Okay, so we have our hue, saturation, and luminance controls open over here on the right. And I want you to notice that this baby has a little bit of some pink tone. And that pink tone, let's just say, because I'm doing a demonstration, is a little distracting, which makes the baby look a little cold. So what I want to do is I can just grab the hue slider for the red channel and make that over, drag it to the right, which adds a little bit more of an orange tone to the red channel. Now you can see that the baby's legs are not quite as pink as they were just a second ago, and that's really all I would need to do there. That's a really simple edit that we can do to this image. Another thing that we can do to this image in this hue, saturation, and luminance control area is for the saturation controls, we have three controls. One for saturation of the colors in shadows, midtones, and highlight zones. Now, I want to bring the saturation of the shadows, I'm going to bring it down in this image slightly. And I'm bring it way down so you can see where it's going. So this is if we kill it, and you can see that the baby is going to remain colored even if we bring all of the color of the shadows low. So what we're going to do is just very subtly remove a little bit of the shadows in the background back here to help create almost like a color vignette so that the color in the middle of the image is more saturated than the colors kind of in these shadows in the background. And that's a subtle change. It's really easy to do and it's really impactful. And then let's take a look at what we can do with the luminance controls. And on the luminance, let's use the color picker or the luminance targeted adjustment tool. That's the targeted adjustment tool. It looks like a couple of arrows over on the right. So what this does is instead of grabbing a slider and moving it, this will grab all of the sliders in accordance to where you designate in the image. So I'll click on the blue, for example, of this tattoo. I can click and drag down and it will make it darker. It's also making both the cyans and the blue colors darker at the same time. So that's an easy way to do that. So now we'll close this color thing. Let's look at the tone curve panel. The tone curve is another way that you can make adjustments to your image tones. There are presets available from the drop down. If you ever see these drop downs in exposure, they're going to be presets that you could use and select from in there. Really, really easy to do. So I'll select the Milky Blacks preset. So it applies a curve here in the curve editor. And we can further make adjustments to those if we want to. Or we can undo that, Control Z or Command Z. Or we can make adjustments with the sliders down below to tweak that curve a little bit more. At the bottom of that panel is split toning, and these controls apply a color toning that's split between the highlights and shadow zones in the image. There are two areas we can designate these colors to be applied. Now, it's very popular in black and white. So in a lot of black and white photography, you'll see these kind of tones, but there are also some color applications for it. And so you can see that it applies a subtle look to this image, and we can tweak these as much as we'd like to make them customized for our photo. Okay, so let's get on to layers actually. So we just talked about the tone curve. We've gone through a lot of stuff right now. I imagine that if you're brand new to exposure, your head might be swimming with new stuff. But that's great. Hopefully you're inspired. Okay, so let's go to another image. Oh, he's so cute. There we go. Big smiles. Okay, so we have this guy, and he's smiling and happy on us. Let's do a couple of things real quick. Some creative editing touches that are pretty easy to control. So I'll skim over those, and then we'll take a look at the layers panel. And so here we go. Let's look at vignette. Vignette is a great way to draw attention to the subject. Now this image already, just because the lens has a little bit of some vignette happening, but we can strengthen that with a vignette here. Now the vignettes inside of exposure have some nice organic controls for distortion and lump size that you can make these look really, really great, and they look like they're made by hand. And so I'm going to turn the softness down so that you can see the edge of the vignette and how it changes. Now, if I change the distortion of this vignette, you can see how it creates that analog look. And then I can crank up my softness again to blend that out, and then turn the amount back down just so that it blends back in, just like so. Let's make sure we're highlighting the right area. Good. Okay. So the vignette panel is full of great tools to create organic, analog-looking vignettes that look like they were made by hand. Let's look at the bokeh panel, which is another great way to bring attention to the subject. Bokeh is the pleasing out of focus areas of the image. And so with these tools, we could make a tilt shift look or add a little bit of some blurring in this image to draw your focus in on one place in particular. On this photo, you can see at the top where his hat is and how it's really crisp in focus. And so making that a little bit soft will help us draw into the face. So I'll move this region. That's what I'm doing here. I'll designate that I want it to be right on his face, and let's add a little bit of some blurring action so that we can see it. Now you can see his hat right here has just a touch of some out of focus happening on it, some little bit of blurring. And we can make adjustments here. There's a ton of different presets inside of exposure that will copy or that simulate actual lenses at different distances. This is what their blurring characteristics of these lenses look like. Paola shoots with Nikon, so I should probably choose one of these. And then after you choose the preset, then you can set how strong you want that effect to be applied to the image, just like this. Now I've already set up the focus region, so it's applying that focus or that softening effect just like that already. And so now we close the panel and it will hide all those controls for us. So we have that little subtle softening effect. I'm going to turn off that layer so we can see it before and after, with and without. So there it is with, and there it is without. It is a very, very subtle thing, but trust me, if you print this image, this one will look better. Okay, so let's take a look at grain. Exposure has grain controls that are second to none. You can't do grain, or you can't control grain in any other software like you can exposure. So it gives you ability to control the grain in the shadows, midtones, and highlights separately. So I'll choose a grain preset here, and then I can, for example, I can make the grain appear in the shadows really strongly, but then have less in the midtones and like almost none in the highlights. And that way we have the texture happening here in the background in the shadows, but then when it gets onto his face or when it gets into the highlights here, we won't see it hardly at all. So that would be neat. I'm also going to turn the grain strength down. So there's a bunch of, you can actually create your own presets for every single one of these panels over here on the right. So after you make an adjustment to find a look that you love, you can always save that as its own preset and use that same grain or overlays or bokeh or vignette over and over and over. Let's talk about overlays. There's overlays panels right here on the right. Okay, overlays panels right here on the right. We can add, let's say a light effect. They'll allow us to create, the overlays allow us to add creative elements to our images if they need them. And I mean, they don't work for every image, but man, when they do work, oh, they're so cool. So let's just choose one. Here's Dazzled Gold. See, now he looks like he's on like MTV. It's a music video. I don't even need to do anything. So we have, these are fully customizable. We can move them around the image. We can rotate them. We can make them more or less opaque. Let's do that the other way. We can make it so that we can barely just get a little glimpse of that. And see, then it's not overwhelming. So if you did have an image, let's say this image needed a little bit of spice, we can add a little bit like that. We can protect a location from the effects of this layer with our protect location tool. See? So if that bothered me, that came across his face right there, I can just take that away just like that. All right, so we've added some overlays to give it some creative elements and looks there. Okay, so now we've made all of these, we've applied all these effects to our image. So now let's take a look at the layers panel. All of the adjustments that we applied are on this first layer. When I hover my cursor over the layer, you can see all of the adjustments that we made listed right here on the screen. Now, all of those things, it does look like a heck of a lot, and we did. We touched that many adjustments when we did whatever we've done to this image so far. Okay, so let's add a second layer, and then let's apply a localized adjustment. So I'm going to select the brush tool. You can also just select the thumbnail and it will open the brush tool. And then with the brush, I want to brush on his face, but I'm going to select a preset. I'm going to select the dodge preset. And then I'm going to paint on his face. Now, the face was a little dark before, and now it's way light. So let's we can see where we're going with this though. I'm going to add some exposure to his face so that it's more accurate, or it's exposed the way that I want it to, so that it pops out of this image, and we'll leave the rest of it a little bit darker. So after I made a little bit of a brush right over his face, or a quick brush over his face, I can turn the opacity of this layer down until his face looks, I think that looks pretty exposed properly to me. So then and that's a pretty easy fix to make. So now we have these two different layers. This one has the lightening effect on his face, or the brightening effect, and the one in the background has all the other elements or tweaks that we've made in the image included on it. All right. So now I want you to notice that where we made this, where we've done our brushing here, if I hover over the mask thumbnail, then in the image in the center of the screen, you can see the red highlight of that mask. That's just saying that that is where the effect from that layer is being applied to the image. So if we look at the layer mask thumbnail, we can see that it's very dark on the outside, and then there is a lighter spot in the center. And that's where we did our brushing. So as you make adjustments to the layer opacity, you will see the change happen to that layer mask thumbnail, which makes it pretty easy to see if you're going to use any of that layer or not, or the effects on that layer. Okay, let's add another image, or let's add another layer and do something a little bit more advanced. We'll use another way of applying a local adjustment. Okay, so we have our brush tool open. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom to the color constraints. Color constraints enable us to set a generated mask using hue, saturation, and luminance boundaries for this image. So I can select the eyedropper on the hue and select the skin. And now I'm going to click Show Mask so we can see what we're doing here. Now we can see the red highlight where we've selected this color range of the image. Now, I don't want to include the teeth, which aren't going to be very saturated. And I don't want to include his hair, which will also be very saturated. And so we'll bring those two together to limit the selection range, or to bring it in a little bit tighter. And then we'll do the same thing with the luminance range. We don't want to bring the very darkest tones of his skin or hair in, and we don't want to get the very brightest tones of his teeth or spectral highlights or anything like that, which I don't think we really have. But anyway, okay, so now we have our selection, and we can see where we have selected on his face. Now we can also add some little bit of noise suppression and some feathering to this all as well, so we don't get any like residual spots or anything like that. It'll make those edges a little bit more fuzzy. There we go. Okay, so now I'll click off Show Mask. All right, so we haven't selected a preset for this layer, so really we just have this really awesome mask that we just made, and we didn't have to brush anything at all, by the way. So we can see it right here. Well, now I'm going to select a preset, and I'll just select Soften Skin. We can see that our softened skin is being applied to the skin, and not the eyelashes, which is awesome, and not inside the mouth, which is great. But it's way too strong, and so we'll turn this way down. So there's just a little bit of softening skin that's happening. And then we can clean up any that's any like small or texture or anything like that that we can see inside that skin. And we don't need to go through and painstakingly, edit each one of those out with a spot heal tool. It's a quick way of smoothing skin out. Anyway, so yeah, now we have our softened skin applied to the skin alone. We have a little bit of a dodge layer just applied to the face, and we did all of our other edits there to the background. So we have created our own unique look for this image. Yay! Okay, so what happens if we need to go back and remember what we wanted or what we did to this image in the next time that we're going to work on an image? I'll show you. In Exposure, it records all of the history. So every step that we've made inside of creating this look, we can go back and we can revisit all of those different stages of the workflow in the history panel. And this history actually stays with the image as well. So remember when before, let me see if I can bring up my Finder window. There it is. So if we remember this before, where we have our sidecar files, that's where all this information is. So all the history lives in there as well. So what that means is if I was working in a collaboration with an outside retoucher, or somebody else was doing edits along with me, maybe in a Dropbox folder, as long as I had this main folder right here saved inside of my Dropbox folder, then all of the edits and all the history and all of that information is saved with it. So that makes it really, really simple. So you can see the edits that you made and the edits that other people have made to your images also. Okay, so now we are just about to wrap up. What do you do at the end of your editing? Well, you get the images out of Exposure. You export them. So let's do that now. So inside of Exposure, we can export with Command E. And that'll bring up the similar options as to when we were copying images to the computer. We decide where we're going to be saving it with the destination settings, which folder, if you want to make a subfolder, etc., etc. We tell it what we want the name of that file to become. We would set that here. Then we would set the file settings for what type of file we want it to be and how big we want it to be, right? Oh, and there's even metadata here where we can include information that we've applied there, keywords, and if you've made watermarks, then you can apply them here. Now, instead of just exporting one image at a time, because that's not really cool and efficient, let's do it quicker than that with the Quick Export tool. So if we open up the Quick Export dialog, you can see that there are several options listed under destination, There's several options listed here. Now, you can select multiple of these. What these are recipes for exporting images. So for Facebook, this recipe saves an image to this destination, to the desktop. It will make an export folder. Within that, it will make a Facebook folder. It'll name the file in a sequence with these settings, and it will be this big. And so that same thing with Twitter. It's going to save to the desktop, and you can see how this goes. So this is called the quick export dialog for a reason. We can quickly select many of these different preset recipes that we have made up, and we can choose to select, and we can select all the images in the folder, or we can just select one and export that. And so right now I have one image selected, and I'll be exporting 4 images just like that, and I'm all done. So that concludes our demonstration. So let's turn our attention over to questions. If anybody has any questions, feel free to pipe up. I don't actually see anything right here in my view. So as well, hopefully you guys are grabbing your keyboards right now so you can ask me any questions. If you, we encourage you to contact other exposure users and to see and to share tips about editing and what you're doing on your images with them in our Facebook group. That is the Exposure Users Facebook group. And another place to take a look, or another place, is over on Instagram. If you share your work that you've edited with Exposure, please share it with us and others. Over on Instagram, add the hashtag #MyExposureEdit. Rick has a question about the difference between focus and sharpening. There is a difference between focus and sharpening. And even though I really want to just give you the smart alecky, the spelling is different. They are completely different, actually. Sharpening is more, like I said in the beginning, that's more for correcting issues inside of the image. Okay, so the controls on the sharpening panel are very precise, and the effects that even if you crank this all the way up, it's not going to be as strong as if you go on the focus panel and add that sharpening effect there. These are much more stronger, more for a creative look. I did not do any more. Okay, Arthur asked about why I didn't do any more sharpening before I exported. That was included in my exporting. So when you go to export, okay, Command E. Oh, I don't have an image selected. When I go to export, you can see that there's sharpening options here under file settings. So if I was going to put some output sharpening, I could do that there. And that's why I didn't do that there. Can I talk about the print module? I can show you about the print module. It's very similar to exporting images. So inside of Exposure, you have a bunch of options in the print module. And it works. Actually, let me select more images. So inside of the print module, we can set however many images we want there to be on the page. So we can make a contact sheet really easy and quick. That makes things really simple, I think. And then, yeah, I mean, it's just like printing actually, we have a video that goes over all the options inside of the print module. So that would probably be the best place to go. You can add output sharpening here, and we have a bunch of presets saved up for your media type. You can set what type of output sharpening you want to add per what you're going to be printing to. You usually set up your print properties as your preset here at the top. So it's one step at a time as you work your way through that. Okay. Oh, there you go. Nate just shared the link to the printing video. Thank you, sir. Is there a possibility to compare 2 pictures side by side? Yes. If you select an image like this, up at the top, there is a layout option, and we can put them in columns. So here's 3. Here's a vertical split. These are different options we have here. We can do quad view. If you have an image in particular you want to keep in this orientation or format, you can pin with the pin. And then if we wanted to, oops, that's linked views. So if I want to zoom in on all of them together, that's link views. The option is on. You turn it off, you can zoom in and zoom out. Oops. All right. There we go. So if I pin this and then I want to go to the next image, I can go through them with my arrow keys on my keyboard. You see how they're rotating. So that's the ways that you can compare photos side by side. And actually, we do have a video on our website that shows that as well. It's called audition mode, or audition, I think, or comparing photos and presets. Couple more questions. Is it possible to manually modify a mask after defining it? Yes. You mean brush, Mark. I believe that you're asking for brushing. Okay, so let's go over to that one. Okay, so on this image, I have my special mask that I made using the color constraints down below, and I can just add, let's look at it here. So there's our mask. So I can just subtract from that mask with the brush if I don't want that here. Oh, let me turn the flow up. There we go. So I can just subtract from that mask just like this with the brush tool as well, and those work together. Once you do add brushing, then I couldn't, for example, use the same color coordinate or the same mask that I have here on another image. And so if you can, and you can just use your color constraints to make the mask, then let's say that you did it here on the baby, then the tones that are in that baby's skin may also work on this little girl's skin, and it might work on this little girl's skin. So you might be able to reuse that mask if you don't use brushing as well as the color constraints that we did down here. So hopefully that answered your question, Mark. Can we export raw metadata to raw files to XMP format? Yeah. Inside of the export dialog, if you export as original, then it exports a file, a sidecar file, an XMP file. Okay. Yay, we got through everything. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. I appreciate you tuning in. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, everybody. If anyone has any questions, get a hold of us. And then we will see you next time.